Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Soraya. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good. We've had a couple conversations before about The Last. We've spoken with Joe Nolte a couple times
Just a few.
at length.
Yes.
And then we've spoken to David Nolte and Vitas Matere.
Yeah.
And then I think shortly after our last conversation, it might have been with David Nolte, I think you came up with the idea to do a panel talk about the long lost last album, Look Again.
Yeah, the unreleased.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Look Again, but it's one of those albums that people talk about often. And Jeff and I decided, well, if we're going to talk about it, we might as well bring in, I don't know, Jeff. There are lots of people in the world, but I think these two folks that are going to join us today, they're in a class of their own in terms of being fans of The Last.
Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about Lina Litonjua and Tom Stevens.
Nice.
Both past guests on our podcast and who very graciously and generously offered to be a part of this panel. But the two of them are some of the biggest fans of The Last that I think Jeff and I know. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there are go-tos.
Yeah. Oy.
So if we're talking Dream Syndicate, we got to talk to Pat Thomas. If we're talking to The Last, we got to talk to these two.
So let's get to it. Hi, this is Soraya.
And this is Jeff.
Our podcast is called Paisley Stage Raspberry and Rhyme.
A podcast where the two of us play music that we like and share anecdotes and background about the tunes.
We hope you'll join our conversation. And without further ado, a grooviar.
Let's get groovy. All right, let's call Lina.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm okay.
That means we're only missing one.
All right, let's add Tom. Oh, wow.
Hello?
Hello, Tom. Hello, Tom.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Everyone's in the room. Fantastic.
You guys have much better backgrounds than I would, so.
I've got some wind chimes for, a little atmosphere.
Perfect.
I love it. All right, so we're so thankful, Tom and Lina, for joining us on our little panel discussion of this album, which I say is kind of like The Last's version of what the Beach Boys had with Smile. So the Beach Boys recorded Smile in the 60s, and it was a great lost album that never came out. And in that way, I think of Look Again as The Last's kind of their version of Smile. So they recorded this album that never was actually released, and the four of us have been able to hear some of it. Lina, you and I were talking that there was some test pressings that got out. Not a whole lot. I think double digits. I think maybe around 60 or so test pressings got out, if that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. And there's some great songs on here, and Soraya had this idea to talk about this album that to this point has yet to be released. We did have David Nolte and Vitas Matere on our show, and both of them had mentioned kind of secretly or in code that there may be a release of this coming. And I had reached out to Vitas earlier and asked if that was still happening, and it sounds like it may be happening, that this album might actually get released, but it may still be a little while before it happens. But we definitely wanted to get into it and talk about it with the two of you. First of all, in a general sense, what do you guys think of this long lost album?
Okay, well, I'll go first. This, like you said, is kind of like Smile, except that it was actually released, like you said, in test pressing form. So it was, at the time, it was actually heard a lot by at least all their fans and, people, I guess, making copies and spreading them around, by a cassette, of course. At the time, I thought it was absolutely, wonderful. I couldn't wait to get my hands on like a real copy, and then it was never released. Hearing it now, The songs are still tremendous, but yeah, I think it could have, used a bit more of a punch. But no, the songs are just tremendous, wonderful, brilliant. So I still love it.
Yeah. Tom, what about you? And how did you first come to hear it?
I first came to hear it. I have a bit of a history with The Last. I came in late. They were playing The Last at Tower Records on Sunset in Hollywood when I started working there in '79. And LA Explosion was on the turntable a lot. They were always playing the Starwood and a lot of the big clubs in town. So it was hard to avoid The Last, actually. And I thought, Joe Nolte is a fantastic songwriter. It wasn't until a few years later, I think I caught up with Look Again in the 80s when I was working with Joe, and I think Mike also was working at a place called Sounds Good Imports. I was working with them and some other folks like Dan Perloff, Tom Gardner, John Mackey, who was later a roadie for the Long Ryders. But I'm with Lina. I think the songs are often just fantastic. I think the production, there's something about it that does not match what I remember of their live show at the time. Their live shows are just tremendous, very, very powerful. And in fact, Joe has mentioned in his kind of archival writings that one label that was going to put out the record or made an offer or at least illusions that they would put out Look Again actually wanted to do it as a live album, which Joe thought was a cop-out at the time. That happened at Long Ryders, too, with their State of Our Union. We had a label approach us asking us to do a live album. Because at that time, it was difficult to capture a live sound on record. It's easier now with computers and things like that. Back then, I mean, it would take weeks sometimes to get a drum sound.
Wow.
And I don't think they did that. I don't think The Last was really interested in that as much as just getting the songs down. And the songs do stand. Even today, it's a tremendous album in that context.
It is, yeah. And Tom, I'm glad that you mentioned the archival writings that Joe Nolte have, because we pulled up some of those, and there's some good information in there about each individual song as well as the album as a whole. Soraya, did you want to read the introduction, what Joe wrote in talking about Look Again?
Well, because Joe Nolte is very succinct in his anecdotal stories, but just indulge us as we kind of set the context here before we go song by song. So, and these are, again, the words of Joe Nolte. Look Again, the second album, was to show how far we'd come in such a short time. Well, we'd gone somewhere pretty far, just not necessarily in the right direction. So there we are, top draws in LA, able to get into any club for free, enjoying the perks, the adulation, and the endless questions about when the new record would come out. You see, we've been coming out with a bunch of really good new songs during and immediately after the recording of the first album, and had worked them so far into the set that we were, by the end of '79, playing more non-album songs than album songs. So we clearly needed to get moving on a new album. Now, Jack Reynolds had just left in November, John Frank had just joined, and I had no idea how radically this little move was going to change the sound. We knew, after all the heat we took for the tameness of LA Explosion, that the follow-up album was going to have to be hard and loud. Other things were happening as well. Bomp had sunk a boatload of money into the first album and hadn't made anything back. They were therefore A, somewhat leery to finance another studio album of the same ilk, B, financially unable to finance another studio album of the same ilk. I'm afraid we behaved a bit ungraciously to Greg Shaw and the gang back then, but we were, as you know, young and stupid. Bomp's a counter proposal was to do a live album showcasing the new songs. In retrospect, a brilliant idea and one that might have changed the rest of my life. At the time, it sounded like a cop-out, like Bob didn't want to support us. Oh well. The result was that we decided to find a studio that would allow us to record the album on spec, i.e. no money up front, we were broke as well, in exchange for a percentage of the royalties. The studio that went for this deal, name of which escapes me at the time, had as co-owner a fledgling producer named Joe Julian, founder of the band Berlin.
Wow.
And about to produce the first Oingo Boingo single. The deal was they would let us record if we used Joe Julian. We agreed. Vitas was upset with me at the time for a couple of reasons. I'm sure there are more than a couple, but you'll have to ask him. I had pretty much run things for the first album insofar as I could. I'd written every instrument overdub up in advance, supervised all the recording, and gotten my way for a majority of the mixes. Vitas, who after all had initially joined the last only as official band recorder, felt left out of the very process that had attracted him to the last in the first place. Therefore, I decided to let Vitas run things this time around, knowing that it would be quite impossible for that to happen if I were in the same room. I effectively banned myself from the mixing booth from day one, but more on that later. Finally, the first album was universally, at that time, considered a powerless, overproduced disappointment. Now, our live sound was more ferocious than ever, and the material stood on its own pretty well. I therefore vowed to absolutely curtail overdubs to create as raw and honest a testament of what we sounded like at the time. You can guess where this is going. Yep. In an attempt to do better, we did just about everything completely wrong. The result is certainly raw and honest, but it's more like a raw and honest testament of what we sounded like on a bad night at rehearsal without monitors and coming down with the flu. There are many who like the record anyway, and indeed I admit it has its moments, but compared to what it could have been, besides, you'll soon be able to judge for yourself right here on this little site. At any rate, it's all a moot point. Word on the street after this one was completely done was, sounds good, when will you be finishing it? Our response, it is finished. Response from person on the street, a disappointed, oh. Now, Look Again, named after the song and also a possibly clever title for a second album, then again, possibly not, was to have been our triumphant follow-up to LA Explosion. The material was strong enough, the timing seemed right, and we went into the project convinced that this thing would lead to great success. No major label would touch the thing with a 10-foot pole, though SST wanted to put it out again. More on all that elsewhere. We watched our following shrink throughout 1980 and then entered a 5-year period where nothing would ever go right again. This album has never, ever been released.
Wow. Thanks, Soraya. And that seems to tie in exactly with what, Tom, you were saying, especially with the part about the power of the live performances versus what was captured on this recording. So that it sounds like you were, and Lina too, eyewitnesses to that fact of the live sound versus this recording.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. It's like night and day.
Okay.
I did want to talk a little bit about the lineup. So it sounds like it's the same lineup as LA Explosion, which was Joe, Mike, and David, the brothers, with Vitas, of course. And then instead of Jack Reynolds being on drums, they had John Frank join, who's also played with Danny and the Doorknobs, and also with Trotsky Ice Pick as well, among other bands. So that sounds like the same lineup, other than the drummer. Is that correct? As far as what you guys know?
As far as I know, yeah.
So,
and a drummer will, a change of drummer means a sea change to a band.
Mm-hmm.
Almost without fail. Believe me. I did it in a couple of bands.
Wow.
And been through more than one drummer.
Tom, can you talk a little bit more about that and how that change in a drummer actually affects the sound of the band?
Well, yeah, and it may not even be obvious to an untrained ear, they'll know what it is, but they won't know what. Drummers often, I mean, there are the drummers that will play on a grid like, a drum box or something like that, but they're in the minority, and especially for that time period, the really good drummer will actually speed up and slow down depending on, it's kind of a natural thing. When the band gets louder, when music hits a crescendo, there's a little bit of speed up, not much. And a great drummer knows how to do that without pushing the band forward or backward. And also they know how to do little flourishes, little dynamic peaks with the band. Every single drummer does that a little bit different, though. And the really good ones are the ones, it's almost transparent what they're doing. You wouldn't know it unless you were playing with them in some capacity in the band. But on the other hand, the average listener would know it. And as far as, somebody like Joe is just up there singing, playing his 12-string, or the bass player or whatever, they're going to notice it right away. It's like, what am I doing different here? And they're not doing anything different. They're playing their guitars, they're playing their bass, they're playing their keyboard exactly the same way. But the drummer, the whole rhythm of the thing, the whole breath in and out, the dynamics have changed whenever you change a drummer.
Wow. I love that. Thanks for that insight. So we wanted to go through each one of these songs. There's 12 songs on this album, and talk a little bit about it and get your guys' thoughts on it, if you don't mind. We did want to add in some of Joe's quick notes from his blog. Fortunately, they're a little less lengthy than the introduction that Soraya checked. So the first song up is the song Lies, which Joe wrote. And Joe wrote about the song saying, "So I was working at a burger joint in El Segundo, and a co-worker had just been stood up by a female co-worker, both teenagers, because he had to work late at said burger joint on a Friday night. The song's a true story. This friend wanted to have a birthday party at a place after hours, and since they were all teens and I was barely old enough to buy beer, I got roped in to the shenanigans. I bought multitudes of beer for a bunch of El Segundo teens. The party went on far too late. I was 2 hours late showing up for work the following morning, which only further aggravated the owner, who had shown up to find all the trash cans overflowing with empty beer bottles, and eventually everyone got busted. It was at this party that I debuted Lies to a bunch of drunken teens, many of whom would become devoted fans a year later." So I wanted to play maybe about 20 or 30 seconds of Lies before we talk about it, and then get your guys' thoughts on it. It may not sound good to you guys over the phone, but it'll just refresh your memory. So this is Lies.
Was a Friday night and you're working late. She called and said she couldn't wait. And when you just stood there without a thing to say, a million other voices rushed into another night in the dark, you heard them say. Another night and another day of fun and frustration, tears and regret. Forever you will hold the memory of the lies, and you don't look now.
All right, so that just as a refresher. What did you guys think of that? Lina, what your thoughts on Lies?
Oh, I love the entire album. So of course I love Lies. As I think both Tom and I mentioned before, it's far more powerful live.
Mm-hmm.
That it's very clean. It's like back then when I first heard the record, the recording, I just fell in love with it regardless. But with the benefit now of hindsight, and seeing them live so often, that I think has even more, I don't know, well, I guess definitely power behind it live. But no, I love it. I just love that song. So yeah.
Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, it sounded great on the phone.
Oh, did it?
You can hear the build. The first 20 seconds or so is just the acoustic thing, and then the drums kick it off, and you're in. And with the chorus, the organ comes in powerful. If this was a live, here we go, what should have been. If this was a live recording, you would have that Rosetta Stone of the power of their live performances kicking this song into a holy God moment. What a great song, As it stands right now, it's still a great song.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, I made a little note that that organ sound or keyboard sound is just so classic last of that period. And I don't know, are you guys familiar with the Vapors by any chance? The band that did Turning Japanese?
I know that song.
Yeah,
I know that song too.
Yeah, they're considered a one hit.
K-Rock.
Yeah, exactly. They're considered a one hit wonder, but they put out 2 albums I think are both really strong, and they came out I think 2 years after this album, and this track in particular totally seems like it's 100% what the Vapors ended up becoming or doing. And just a side note, they have a new album coming out, The Vapors, that's they have a single out and it sounds just like Turning Japanese. It's got that same power, and that's coming out in a couple weeks. But that's the first thing that I thought of. Like, I don't know if the Vapors ever heard this album or how they could have in England, but if they did, they totally ripped off the last. Soraya, did you have any thoughts on the song?
I just keep going back to something Tom mentioned earlier, and that is Joe Nolte is such a great songwriter, and the lyrics, I cannot step away from the lyrics. And if this is the order that they planned this album to have, this kicks it off. I mean, this is like a boot to the neck, this song. Once it kicks into gear. But I now, listening to it after hearing both Tom and Lina talk about it, yeah, I hear what you're saying, that I think I've seen them live, and I can imagine what that song must have sounded like live at the moment that this album was kind of being conceived and being thought about and recorded. And I'm like, man, this should have been a live album.
Yeah, maybe Bomp was right. Maybe Greg Shaw was onto something.
I don't know. But
Hindsight.
yeah, it's always 2020.
All right, so the second track, Soraya, do you mind reading Joe's intro?
Yeah. So the next track is That's Just Life. And again, the lyrics on this song are just, they're so good, super timely. He noted that the song was written in 78, but the lyrics are, they're very applicable to today and now. So Joe's notes on this song are, we had played a show at the Whiskey A Go Go in February, sharing the bill with the Zippers, among many others. Watching another band from the audience, I noticed the current drummer from the Germs bouncing around in front of me just to my left. Immediately to my left was a surly, mean, and getting meaner by the second looking biker dude, who was probably twice the guy's size. Said biker was directly behind Germ's drummer guy and unwittingly kept bouncing up and down and back and forth and accidentally and unknowingly, repeatedly bouncing slightly into the biker dude. Biker dude finally decides enough is enough, makes a fist, and begins to rear back his arm. Well, Germs fan that I am, I had to do something. So I grabbed biker dude's arm. Remember, he was probably twice as big as me as well, and attempted to give him my most earnest, we're all just having fun smile. Biker dude looks at me incredulously, begins to rear back the aforementioned arm in my direction, and I shudder to think what would have happened had not the whiskey bouncers shown up at that moment. Now, if you're a whiskey bouncer and you have a choice between an 800-pound biker or a 120-pound me, who would you choose? So I was thrown out of the whiskey, scant hours after having been on its stage. In retrospect, the bouncers probably saved my life. As far as I know, no violence ensued subsequently, and I probably could have gotten back into the club 10 minutes later. At the time, however, I was outraged. I hadn't started the trouble. I was trying to prevent a fight. Remember, I was young and stupid. Anyway, this song came out of all that. The first line conceived being, one more club that didn't allow the likes of you inside.
That's funny. That's hilarious. All right, let's listen to a few minutes of it. And I noted that the intro reminds me a little bit of The Doors. But anyways, let's hear a few seconds of That's Just Life.
People turn their head to me, happens all the time. The only shoulder blade I see every single time. Guess I don't know by now, just not wanted anyhow. One more club that's gonna allow blacks of me around. I don't mind, that's just life, and it's alright. It's the only one I know.
So good. I love that. Lina, do you have any thoughts on this song in particular?
What you just read, Joe's words there, that's pretty much what it was like then. People were always getting banned from clubs for one reason or another. Usually the punks, anyone that caused any kind of trouble that looked the least bit different in certain places were not welcome. And so, it became kind of a game in a way where you'd figure out, well, can I go to this club tonight? Or did they cancel that show too? That's a pretty good oral explanation of what it was like then. So that's a great song.
How about you, Tom? Any thoughts on this?
It actually reminded me of an unrelated, it wasn't a last show, it was an undertone show that I saw at the Whiskey, and it was very tribal. Robin Lane and the Chartbusters had opened for the Undertones. Undertones had more of a kind of a, if you will, Orange County punk kind of vibe, where it was very tribal. They turned their backs on Robin Lane when she was playing. But anyway, cutting to the chase, the Undertones are playing and people are trying to jump up on stage and, somersault off it and, slam dancing and everything. I'm standing there in that pit area and I just narrowly missed this guy. He's about my size and he's falling backward. And I try to catch him because at that time, like if we were slamming or whatever and slammed into somebody else, oh, I'm sorry, I stepped on your foot,
Yeah.
We were cool about it. Right. And this guy just barely missed it. We were helping him up. He's got this red leather jacket on, real nice and everything. I look at the guy. It's Joe Strummer.
What? Wow. Oh, my gosh. No way. Wow. Wow.
So that was the Whiskey back then.
Wow. So were the Clash playing anywhere nearby, or
I think that's when they were in town doing the Friday show, and they later played the Roxy for $5 a ticket, which I was actually... Thank you, Howard Krumholtz at Tower, for giving me the ticket all those years ago.
Nice.
I saw them at the Roxy in 1980. I think that would have been 1980.
Wow.
So slightly later, but, same vibe.
That's incredible. What a great story. I love that. Soraya, any thoughts on the song?
You know what I like? Jeff, you said the minute that organ that kicks in, it's like so synonymous with blast. I just love that undertone of the organ in this song.
Yeah. And
again, like you just can't get away from this frenetic pace of a last song. Like, if I'm not slam dancing to that song, something's wrong. If the energy level isn't like right up to the ceiling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I just like it, and the lyrics I think are just fantastic. So,
And this, That's Just Life has my favorite guitar solo on the album. The guitar solo, it's really cool. I really like that. But up next, song number 3, another Joe song. So far, the first 3 songs are all penned by Joe Nolte. This is one of my 2 favorite songs on the album. This is Obsession. And Joe wrote about Obsession. He wrote the mid part, See the Days Just Die in the Sunlight, etc., was written, words and music, on December 3rd, 1976. It's amazing that he's got some of these dates down, like to the day, as a bridge for the current song of Mike's called Garden of Youth. Since we'd never done anything with that song, I stole the bridge for this one. The rest of the song evolved out of a fake Dylan thing I came up with on October 8th, 1978, but never finished. And the resulting combination as revised was written for, in quotes, G. Lina, I have a question for you about some of these in quotes, who I actually may end up naming. Lyrically, the usual over-romantic nonsense, although I have actually had the dreams described in the song. So I'll go ahead and play the song. I'll play a few seconds of the song. So this is Obsession, song number 3.
Once in a dream, a time, long years ago, I recall. I stood there for a while, a stone of bricks cracked with the years, and I swore to free them all. For it lay between me and someone, a girl I had never seen. Once that was me, watching and waiting, that was my dream till I found you. Once in a dream, I cried.
Okay, I will tell you my thoughts first.
okay. Okay.
Okay, that is actually quite possibly, if not my favorite song, it's definitely one in the top 3 of my favorite songs from this album. It's such a gorgeous song. I mean, the heart he puts into it. It's very personal, and you can tell by the way he sings it and the way he plays it. And like I said, that one, it kind of, whenever I hear it, it just kind of makes me pause. It's like whatever else is going on, I just have to focus on that song. So
Yeah.
and yes, I do know who he's singing it, but it's not for me to tell.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough. Tom, any thoughts?
Just another great song. It's probably one of my favorites on the album, definitely,
Yeah.
among many others.
Yeah. Yeah. Soraya, you have any thoughts?
I mean, what more can you say about it? I really like the arrangement of that song, and it's just so well written. I mean, I don't know. I'm a big fan of Joe Nolte's writing, so I just focus on the words way too much.
Yeah, and there's a sound in here that comes later in the song. I think it's a flute. It sounds kind of like a flute, but it could be a keyboard sound. And I don't know if you guys know by any chance if it's an actual flute. Since I know that Vetus did play flute, and there are songs like It Had to Be You where he's actually playing flute, but it sounds more like it's probably keyboard based. I don't know if you guys know by any chance. Let me see if I can play part of it that has that sound.
Oh, oh, oh. Once I had dreams,
So that's probably a real flute, do you guys think? Could you hear
Well,
that?
it was Vetus, so it could be either one, but yeah, it's probably a flute.
Yeah.
Probably is. Well, ask Joe when he gets back.
Yeah. So my introduction to the last was It Had to Be You from their from Radio Tokyo tapes where I first heard that. Of course, that so that stood out to me. So I'm thinking it's flute, and regardless, it sounds great. So. Soraya, up next, Snake in the Grass.
Snake in the Grass. Snake in the Grass. Here are the notes for the listeners. Brother Mike had noticed by this time that I wasn't adding music to any of his lyrics anymore. You'll recall that some of the first proto-last songs resulted from such a collaboration. So he gave Vetus a bunch of lyrics, including a song called Pounding, which Vetus dutifully set to music. Vetus also managed to add a couple of in retrospect, fairly mean Mike-directed lines of his own. At any rate, by early 80, the happy merging of punk and pop people that had defined the latter half of 1979 and lined the pockets of happy club owners was beginning to dissolve. This dissolution would, among other things, lead to our slow decline from the top of the scene by the end of the summer. Vetus, presciently intuiting what horrors were to come, took the pounding music, shuffled it all about, and came up with Snake in the Grass. The principal prophetic line was, people draw lines where there ain't no lines, and they put you on the other side.
Love that.
Lines were indeed shortly drawn, and we did indeed find ourselves by August 1980 on the wrong side.
All right, so let's listen to the first Vetus pinned track. This is Snake in the Grass. I can imagine how great that one would be in a live setting. So, Lina, any thoughts on this one? There are some great screams in here, by the way, from Joe that come later in the song.
Yeah, he's real good at that, especially live. This song was actually, I heard this song. I had a copy of there's some demos that actually sounded pretty finished to me. That was actually given to me by Michael Quercio, and they're known in like the last fan community as the Red Demos. Oh. And this was one song that was on that cassette. So that was my first introduction. So it's a bit different than the version that appears here on Look Again. But yeah, this is like like you said, a Vetus song, and it absolutely slays live.
Oh, really? I would imagine it would be. Yeah. Tom, do you remember ever hearing this one live by any chance?
I didn't, but it whenever you would see the Last perform, it was like swimming in the ocean. You know, there would be songs that would stick out, and then they would say, cover you, we ain't got nothing yet, or something like that. It's like, yeah, cool song. And you would find the kind of connection between the 60s punk and the modern day punk of that era. And they were always able, and this is a really good example of a song that kind of synthesizes both genres into one. And yeah, the Snake in the Grass, the lyrics and stuff like that, bands are always going to have tension. There's always ego. There's always something like that. You try to keep it out of your lyrics. Sometimes it does pop up, and some have a better talent for keeping it subtle and symbolic.
Yeah. I love that line where he mentions that people draw lines where there ain't no lines, and then they put you on the other side. It's such a great visual. It's a great line, yeah. All right.
Well, at least it's not KKK took my baby away.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
the first Ramones song that I heard, actually. Yeah. All right. So moving on, track number 5, Should I Say a Word, is actually another Vetus song. Joe writes about this song. He says, another Vetus composition, and one of the ones I butchered unmercifully, earning lasting resentment from Vetus. He produced a solo demo for me in early 80, and as we were busily choosing and mostly writing material for the upcoming recording sessions, I liked the song a lot, but it didn't flow real well. It was just disjointed and strange, and may well have been better than what I did to it, but well, you live and learn. I chopped the thing up, added a bit of music, very little, and even threw in a ska section. I was very into ska and rockabilly at the time. I would turn another Vetus song into rockabilly, which became Sin number 2. I like it, but Vetus doesn't like his singing on it. And this has been one of the principal reasons Look Again has never come out. He'll kill us if we put this one online. We may anyway. He doesn't know where I live, Joe says. So let's listen to a bit of it. I think it's the only song that Vetus sings on the album, at least lead singing. So this is Vetus singing Should I Say a Word?
I saw her yesterday. I fell in love. Seen her many times before and closed my eyes. I want to see some more. Disappears like grains of sand that pop up near no matter where I am. I see her walking by. I feel my feet surround me. Blood rushes round me. Never take my eyes.
All right, Vetus, if you ever listen to this, sorry for playing that if you don't like it. All right, Lina, any thoughts on this one?
That's I don't believe, of course, that I've ever heard that live. So it's hard to say whether or not that would have been improved live or not. It's definitely a Last song, but it's very also definitely not a Joe Nolte song. So yeah, you could tell.
Yeah. So Vetus has made comments before about his voice and him not being happy with his voice, but we like his voice. Soraya and I definitely like his voice. Yeah. So he needs more confidence because he's got a great voice. Tom, do you have any thoughts on this song?
I think it's got a great hook. Melodically, you walk away and that the melody line is going to stick in your head.
Mm-hmm.
It's different from Joe's approach to that. To singing, to melodicism, etc. They're both really strong, in my opinion. It's just a shame that it's there's the little ego problems, there's the insecurity problems. Again, that's going to happen with bands. The ones that last just know how to compartmentalize that kind of thing and just let the songs go. I remember Joe once saying, it doesn't really matter if you get along as long as the songs are there, as long as the music's there, as long as you play good music. That's all that matters.
Huh. I
think that song's a good example of that.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. I hadn't heard that quote before. Soraya, any thoughts on the song?
I like this song. Yes, it's a different melody and tune. I love Vetus's singing voice, and I really like it on this song. And I think he sells the song, And, Tom, I keep thinking about what you just said, that in a previous song, that there was the perfect merging of 60s punk and the punk of the moment. And you definitely kind of hear this kind of reimagining this musical style in this song. I just really like it. It's a different sort of tune for me. So, yeah.
So speaking of different, the last song on side one is Difference, and we go back to Joe Nolte, and the keyboards are amazing on this. Soraya, do you mind reading what Joe has to say?
Yeah.
Sorry,
so
you get the
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
You get the longer ones, like Joe's longer ramblings.
Well, with Joe Nolte, you just never know sometimes.
Yeah, and this one has another name mentioned in quotes with just an initial, so...
Yes, which we will not ask anymore who these people in quotes are. So about Difference, Joe writes, "This is possibly my favorite of anything I've ever written. It's certainly the favorite of many OG Last fans. This one was written for, quote-unquote, A. I don't think there are any other A's, are there? The song consists of a few similar sounding verses and a musically completely different middle section. If you've therefore come to the immediately obvious conclusion, you're right. The verses and the midsection did indeed start life as two completely different songs in progress, the only two. in fact, that I was working on while immersed in the recording of LA Explosion. Had no real subject matter for either of them. They were mostly just music with the odd lyric here and there, and I wasn't getting anywhere with either of them. Then met A. Had an all too brief, almost flirtatious moment, almost hooked up subsequently and didn't, and 2 weeks later, on March 17th, learned upon my arrival at a punk show in downtown LA that I had fallen into yet another over before it began scenario,
Aww.
which would have been good enough song material. However, it was somewhat initially mitigated and ultimately enhanced by what was to unfold that strange evening. For this was the evening of the infamous Elks Lodge riot. I'll probably say more elsewhere about that personally getting thrown down a huge flight of stairs by one of LA's finest, etc. But suffice it to say that losing said girl combined with the riot was irresistible. I immediately threw the two songs in progress together and began to work in earnest. As one may discern from the dates, it would be nearly 3 months before I finished the song. Part of this is attributable to the fact that we were completely immersed in LA Explosion sessions. The rest attributable to the fact that I wanted to get this one exactly right. I did.
Nice. I love that confidence. Let's hear a little bit of it. This is Difference.
The day I first saw you, the day I realized I was in love with you. I would not have believed that it would be the last I'd ever seen of you. You told me I was not like all the rest. You said I had a difference. You drove into the night and I believed, though I did not know what you meant. A dream, you told me you had waited for a year to fill your dream. And then we let it slip away like dreams do, like the other dreams I've seen. I know I should have called, I should forget. I know some people could forget. Yeah, it's all cool, never dream. But with a little difference, you look within. And I saw, and I saw, and I saw you.
That song is so hard to fade out. I don't want to do it. So, Lena, any thoughts on this? I don't know anything about the Elks Lodge riot.
Yeah, that exactly that song. The Elks Lodge riots were a pivotal moment in the LA punk scene of the time. That was, you had a whole bunch of like some of the top acts, like the Go-Go's, the Alley Cats, the Plugs. There was just a bunch of people, and I was there, but yet not there, because it's like I was with my friends who were hanging out outside, and so when the thing started to go down, when the cops came in and all that, it was just like everybody just ran, and the chaos that ensued is stuff of legend now. But this song in particular, like he said there, it's a particular favorite of the OG Last Fan. It definitely is with me, and whenever he does that live, there's even like a call and response sort of thing with the old fans and with Joe. But yeah, I think that is a perfect song. I mean, the lyrics, everything that he wrote it, the way he wrote it, it's kind of like a perfect capsule of an event, of a moment, and yet it's so personal for him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sounds really personal in the, especially during the beginning vocal. So I couldn't stop. I couldn't fade out on that because the emotion in his voice is just amazing. Tom, did you have any thoughts on this one?
Just a fantastic song. Top, I'm not one for lists, but that goes way up there. Everything that I was not at the Elks Lodge like Lina was. I didn't then choose footwear immediately afterwards with running from the police in mind.
Yeah.
But that was a big cultural shift in the song. And incorporating also Joe's personal thing, it just kicks a song over into greatness, in my opinion.
Yeah. Soraya, any thoughts?
Look, just listen to these lyrics, okay? And this is towards the end of the song. You know you must believe, you know it must come down. They shiver with the sound. When you feel it too, it'll call for you. It's tumbling down. Those lines in this song, it's like hit me like a ton of bricks. He's just such a good storyteller, and then the way the song ends, I mean, whew. And now I have the context in the right frame, so that's helpful. But yeah good song.
And
good.
Musically, right after that stanza that you just read, there's this an ascending guitar run I really like. It really stands out to me just before they come into the part where it says, "Come the 17th, the only killers on the streets are the police." So in between what you read, there's a really killer guitar line, and I love the jangly guitar. It's throughout the album. It's got a really good guitar sound. The clean guitar sounds really good, and of course the keyboards in the song really stand out to me on that one. So if we flip the test pressing, if we had one, which I don't, we would go to side 2, Everyone's a Holiday. So we go back to Vetus. So Joe says about Everyone's a Holiday. Vetus's homage to the Mae West film Every Day's a Holiday, a lovely example of dark humor and pop hooks. The chorus especially being arguably the most Beatlesque thing he's ever done. The demo he made of this was great, and the strange harmony that should not exist the thing during World in Trouble, Ashes and Rubble part was taken note for note from Vetus's original. Unlike others, this is an extremely faithful version of what we had originally intended. Oh wait, I take that back, damn. I was so proud of myself for a second thinking I'd resisted the opportunity to meddle in one of his songs. You see that midsection, based mostly on the chorus, was mine, words and adapted music. The demo version was just verse, chorus, and I just thought, it might benefit from an extra part. Guilty as charged. Again, forgive me, Vetus. So this is Everyone's a Holiday. First song, side 2.
Everyone's a holiday. Hop right up and pass away. Never see another face. Slip away without a trace. World's on fire, and I'm gonna ask why. The world's on fire, burning you up. Candlelight golden.
All right, Lina, any thoughts on this one?
This is, I think, one of my favorites of the stuff that Vetus wrote.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is. I mean, even though Joe interfered, I think it works well.
Yeah.
So I don't think he has anything to apologize about, except maybe to Vetus because he messed with Vetus' song. But I think it made it. It works really well.
I think so too. Yeah. Tom, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Whenever somebody writes a what they call a middle eight or whatever between the verse, chorus, and it's a different person, those middle eights are like different songs. They're like, and it's really cool. It always just extends the song. So when you get back to the hooks, when you get back to the third verse or whatever, you're ready for it. You're not burned out. You've heard something different. It's rolling right along. And with that song, it's got a good beat. You can dance to it. I give it a 95.
I love that. So, Soraya?
I love the energy of this song.
Yeah.
I love the energy of this song, but also it's just a solid song. Yeah. And I'm with Tom. I can dance to it.
Yeah.
So it's perfect for me.
All right. Next up, my second favorite song on the album, Subway Song, another Vetus song. So, Soraya, you have a little bit to read.
Sure. So, about Subway Song, Joe writes, yes. Speaking of Vetus and my meddling, this is the definitive example. I really wanted to do a rockabilly song, but hadn't come up with anything. Vetus had demoed a song earlier that year that was essentially a slow, creepy, gothic, million-voice chant with a haunting refrain, "I take the subway home," repeated over and over. It was chilling and cool, and I had no idea how we would ever be able to do it live. The arrangement was literally a whole lot of Vetus voices chanting over a subdued organ. Just for fun, I was sitting in the basement of the church and goofing around and started doing the thing with a rockabilly rhythm. It worked. Real well, in fact. The lyrics are Vetus's and emerged relatively unscathed. Ditto for the music, though I did add enough room for some cool rockabilly licks. Vetus hated the arrangement. Then people began congratulating him on an outstanding composition. Hopefully that mollified him somewhat. For me, I never worried about ruffling feathers in the late 70s. My concern was to create the best versions of the best songs possible, and I did not differentiate between dissecting and mixing up my own songs or anyone else's. By early 1980, I began to feel bad that I had been meddling too much. I backed away just in time for the Look Again sessions, stopped meddling as much, and let The Last become a more democratic organization. Which is partly why we fell so fast from our exalted position in the early 80s, and which is probably why this album was never released. Subway Song.
Sitting in the street to get time, but I can't sleep at night. There's a shadow hanging over me. The city sleeps at night. The sky gazing and the sea get dark. Dark shadows rush the light till nothing's black and nothing's white. Below and out of sight, city's telephone of bright. Can't keep my distance anyway.
I love that guitar lick. That could be a Long Ryders song almost. Long Ryders could do something with it. So, Lina, what Soraya was just reading, she was talking about Joe sitting in the basement of the church. Is this the church that is featured in The Decline of the Western Civilization?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's the church.
Okay.
The actual church.
So did you...
I was only in there a couple of times back then, but yeah, it's pretty much accurate there in The Decline.
Yeah.
It was a kind of fun little, degenerate place, but yeah.
No.
It was perfect for the time.
Yeah. So, any thoughts on Subway Song?
One of my absolute favorites
Yes.
of any last song, either Joe's or Vetus's.
Wow.
And exactly like what he was saying, this is a favorite live. I mean, back then, everyone would just like burst out dancing. This was, one of those floor fillers. And today, even whenever when I've heard it recently, whenever they played recently, and they played that one when Vetus was playing with them, it's still amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's definitely one of my top 3 songs from this album that I like.
Great song. Tom, do you like this one?
Oh, I love it. And that energy is so apparent, and that energy may come from that tension between Joe and Vetus. And they may not even realize it at the time, but if they were to zoom out to the proper level, they could see how great of a song and how much energy they put into it due to that tension. That's how good bands work.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, let's move on to Everybody Had It With You. So this is track number 9. Joe had a little thing to say here. some of which was a surprise to me. He says, in 1973, I wrote a song called Wharf Rat for a rock opera Vetus was creating. This was, of course, right in the middle of our strange Prague Gone Crazy era, about which I trust I have or will write more about elsewhere. I was frantically producing Songs to Order in early 1980, and we were about to record this album, and the roster of songs wasn't yet satisfying to me. On August 20th, 1977, I'd written a song called Don't Go, true story written for R, in quotes, who had just told me that I made her nervous, which had nearly ended up on LA Explosion, but didn't. A definitive band version of this has never been recorded, though a reasonable 4-track demo exists somewhere. Lina? Anyway, I took the riff from the end of Don't Go and used it to start a new song. I wanted to do something Buzzcocks-like with some of the dynamic of their magnificent song, Lipstick. Shortly into the writing process, I realized that the Erstat Buzzcocks melody I was creating was extraordinarily similar to the old song, Wharf Rat. So I completed the melody, lifting several musical bits for almost note straight out of that one, and the song was quickly finished. It was, at the time, a made-up scenario, a tongue-in-cheek parody of my usual true-life romantic mishaps. It's not contrary to popular belief directly about G, though G did express alarm that people would assume that. I laughed. I was wrong. People in years to come would indeed assume that, all the way to a rather unkind bit of graffiti on a dressing room wall of the Whiskey A Go-Go. Oops, he says. So, let's hear a little bit of Everybody Had It With You.
Everywhere I run, I always hear about the thing it does, and it seems like you've been doing it with everyone. And it seems so strange when I hear them say, and I feel that I've been used. I wonder if it's true. I wonder why you had to do the things you say that you do.
All right, Lena. Do you know anything about the background of what Joe's talking about with this song?
Well, I do know that what he wrote in that little blurb there is correct, that people just kind of naturally assumed it was about G. So, anyway, yeah, that's and that's another song. It was the second song that I first heard on the Red Demo cassette, and it is a different version from that. I like it though. You know, it might be partially fiction, whatever it is, but it's a great song.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite last songs, actually.
Very cool. I wasn't aware that there was a song called Wharf Rat. I know that there was the record label that they made, the Wharf Rat Records, so...
Wharf Rat Tales.
Yeah. So I wasn't aware that there was a song or a rock opera that was... So, Tom, any thoughts on this one?
Well, I'm not privy to the details of the lyrical content, but melodicism, the counter melodies that the organ's playing against the melody that's being sung, and again the energy it's really great. I like it.
Yeah, I think this song, probably more than any other last song, has a lot of chord changes, which is kind of unusual for the band, I thought. And then he mentioned the part about the buzzcocks. You can really hear, like, later in the song, I call it machine gun strumming. There's some jang, 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 jang stuff going on later in the song. I can see where he was going with the buzzcocks thing. Soraya, any thoughts?
I absolutely love this song and the energy behind it. Yeah, I heard a lot of different things from the band on this one, and I just liked it a lot. It's different.
Very cool. All right. Well, Soraya, you got a little bit to read. So the next song is Jungle Book. This one.
Everyone, I hope you're in a comfy chair.
This one is my least favorite on the album.
Okay, so
Tell us a story.
So this is Jungle Book. Hey, appropriately titled. So Joe's notes on this. By mid 1978, I'd known Backdoor Man's Fast Freddy for a couple of years, but only now started hanging out with him regularly. He knew this guy named Jeff Pierce, who had a band called the Red Lights, and at some point played me the Red Lights Jungle Book. I was floored and said, I got to meet the guy that wrote this. I did, and from late 78 through early 80, the three of us were inseparable drinking buddies. Now, Jeff's dead, Fred's clean and sober, and I'm drinking a rum and coke as I write. Go figure. And then there's a bit more, parentheses. The above is almost verbatim from something I sent to a guy in New York who's writing a bio of Jeff, who, as you probably know, went on to form the Gun Club and became legendary. As it is Sunday morning, I am not, in fact, drinking rum and coke. At any rate, the best way to tell this story is with a couple of excerpts from the journal I kept in 79. Jeff's band had broken up, and I thought it was criminal that hardly anyone knew Jungle Book existed. I liked that song a lot. What follows are a couple of the aforementioned excerpts. June 1, 1979. I called Fred's house. No answer. Oh well, scratch tonight. Half hour later, I called Fred's again. He was home. Great. We agreed that he should get a bunch of people down there, solace in numbers. He said to call back at 9 and he'd know what was happening. Nobody showed up for like 2 hours, so we hung out and got plastered on Mickey's and Tres Equis. Oof. Eventually, people arrived. The Precision's bass player, Jeff Pierce, Don Snowden, some people from Carl's Jr., all in all, only 2 or 3 girls arrived, and they were all taken. Whoopee. So everybody got smashed. I told Jeff that I would give him 1 month to get the Red Lights back together, and then the last we're going to do Jungle Book. He couldn't believe I liked the song. June 28th, 1979. Parentheses, the last are playing Gazaris on a Thursday night in front of 60 people. Second set was pretty cool. And encore number 1 is now history. We started into Pushing Too Hard, bringing it down as Jeff Pierce hit the stage to go into a long, fake James Brown live record type intro. Then Freddie hit the stage and the joint went nuts. Everybody danced, people pogoed and twisted side by side. They did the whole crowd tease thing at the end, Jeff cajoling Fred to come back out, etc. Lots of girls with stars in their eyes. Bill Gazzari had an orgasm. Randall had an orgasm. Mike and David, my brothers, had to clean up the dressing room.
Oh.
Jeff Pierce wrote me out the lyrics to Jungle Book. He doesn't want to do it. So I said, fuck it. Last will do it. July 12th, 1979. Evidently, Vitas was pissed because I planned to put Jungle Book on the second album. He didn't want to tell me, so he told Randall. Randall then called me and said that if we put it on the album or I played in Jeff's band, I would probably make an enemy out of every last member. I was pissed, but reluctantly agreed to cool it. Red Lights wise. Anyway, we proceeded to play Jungle Book throughout the fall of 1979, frequently with Jeff himself singing it. It was a hit, and the band finally relented, and we did indeed, obviously, record it for this album. Jeff's original is, of course, better. Jungle Book.
Under the light, dark parking lot of light. Somebody screaming, yelling into the night. And babe, I don't know if he's talking to God or what. I don't want anything, just keep it shut. Under the light, dark parking lot lights. I look up and see, I see the black and blue lights. Babe, I can look up and I can think of you. The sign of Monica Boulevard Blues. Under the light,
All right, Jungle Book. Lina, do you know anything about this connection with Jeffrey Lee Pierce and that whole situation with Red Lights?
I didn't know Red Lights at all. Jeffrey Lee Pierce, he became more of a legend later on. So I didn't know them at the time. But I will say about this song, it does not sound like a Last song, but the lastification of it kind of turns it into a Last song. I don't know that I would agree that it went with the record on this album, but it doesn't not work either. But it's good for a non-Last song. But that's unfortunately all I can tell you about that.
All right, fair enough. Tom, what do you think about this one?
I agree. It does not follow the flow of the album. It's an interesting piece of, it's an interesting song. It does not sound like the last, although, you still have the organ and Joe's vocals and everything. Of course, Gun Club and everything, I missed. I loved that album when it came out, and it was a Tower Records favorite, Fire of Love. So, and he got turned into a legend later, much later. And of course, Joe spotted talent early. He's known for covering. There's some obscure covers that Joe has done over his career by people that are not known that he would champion, which is a really cool thing about Joe.
Yeah, I love that. Soraya, what do you think of my least favorite song on this album?
I tried to, yeah.
Lina, I think you said it really interestingly. You said like the lastification of the song kind of makes it last-ish, but to me it's just an odd song. And that's just me. That's just my opinion. But
fair enough.
The lyrics are really good. It's just a weird. It's an interesting choice. I don't know. I don't know if I'm a big fan yet.
So I was wondering for me if this was one of those situations where the live version, speaking to what we were talking about earlier with Greg Shaw's recommendation for Bump or for the band to release it for Bump as a live album, if that would have changed this particular song. Just a thought for me. So we got 2 more songs left. The Other Side is next, Joe Nolte song. And Joe writes about The Other Side, saying, brothers Mike and David were frequently pissed off at me sounds like everybody was, during the golden years of the late 70s. I was at once the oldest brother as well as the leader of the band they found themselves stuck in. I had, in short, become an authority figure, the very thing I was rallying against in songs and interviews. Interesting contradiction. Anyway, as a response, I wrote this, which is an attempt to look at myself through their eyes. In quotes, as we turn to leave you, you better take a look and try to see. David did indeed successfully leave and has since played with everyone from Dave Davies to David Gray to Maria McKee to Wednesday Week. Mike, however, waits for the phone to ring, waits for me to make the last active again. And he doesn't know yet, but we have a confirmed gig coming up, and this was in 2002 at Brennan's Pub. Yes, I never learned. The last rise yet again. And Luke, if you see this, contact me. I have a working number for you. So anyways, this is The Other Side.
Running my life as if I were a slave controlled by your war. Do this, do that till I started to scream, but never a sound could be heard. So keep on with your dreaming, it doesn't matter to me. Even now you're sinking beneath the web you own. Everybody, I know, you can change.
Alright, it pains me to fade that one out. I love this song. Lina, what are your thoughts on The Other Side?
The lyrics on that are amazing. I hadn't really thought too deeply about the lyrics, and since seeing or hearing Joe's words about it, yeah, that's kind of amazing that he had that idea of looking at himself through their eyes and writing about it himself in that way. So in this way, it's an amazing song. I mean, I've always liked it anyway, but now it has kind of like more depth to it as far as with the meaning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, any thoughts?
Yeah, really interesting way, prompt to write a song with.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll point out, I think it's a great song. There's that and Difference, which is earlier in the album, is also on this Joe and Mike CD. I don't know if it's still available or not, but fairly recently, like within the last 10 years anyway, Joe and his brother Mike did an all acoustic album where they redo a bunch of Last songs, and it's just great.
Oh,
and
wow.
the version on that is quite excellent.
Oh, I don't have that. I need to seek that out.
I'll make sure you get it. Let me know.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I can.
Is that okay, Joe?
Oh, by the way, I went to that Brennan's Pub gig and I recorded it. So if you want a copy of that,
Oh, wow.
I can provide that.
Yes, that sounds great.
We'll have to arrange that.
Yeah,
We've
it was a great.
See what
gig,
happens,
too.
major labels, when you don't put out good stuff.
exactly.
The fans take over.
Indeed. So, Soraya, any thoughts before we move on to the last song?
No, I think it's a really. I agree with Lina. It's a really interesting way to reflect back, through that lens, and I think he set the context for that. I just think it's I like that song, and I think after Jungle Book, it really kind of sets us up for this last 1-2 punch.
Yeah, indeed. And the guitars sound great. The arpeggio picking, clean guitars sound really good. And then with Joe doing those, at the beginning, it pulls me in right away, just musically and vocally right away. So the last song is the title track, which is unusual. A lot of bands will put the title tracks towards the beginning of albums usually. So this is the title track being the last song, Look Again. So Joe says about this one, not content with Difference as the long magnus opus of the record, I came up with this one, written just before we entered Is it my turn to read, or is it your turn? Sorry.
Yeah, please, go for it.
I looked how long it was, and I'm like, this is probably Soraya's.
It's been that way, but no, continue.
Okay.
It's all good.
Not content with Difference as the long magnus opus of the record, I came up with this one, written just before we entered the studio. It's all about G, again, and her sadly dear departed mother. The verses and choruses came pretty quick. I'd been working on them musically off and on since late 79, but I needed a completely different middle part, a la Difference. Therefore, having stolen the opening riff from the end of the aforementioned Don't Go, for Everybody Had It With You, I now return to Don't Go to steal lyrically and musically the lines, I feel so bad I wish that I was dead. If you don't know why, just listen to what she said. Working with that, I had my midsection. Just couldn't figure out how to get back to the last verse. Now, I had written a song in mid-79 called Work, which I liked and like a lot, but which nobody else did. So I took one of my favorite parts from it to bridge the midsection back into the last verse. Lyrically, the song is basically just a musical summary of our relationship at the time, with the gory parts left out. Another of my favorite concoctions. The song took place in 3 stages. Stage 1, the first complete version of the song, was an early attempt at a finished product. In early March of 1980, when the song was still being treated as a normal 2.5-minute number, it consisted of a short intro similar to the final version, as well as 3 verses with choruses in between. The melody for verse and chorus was already complete. Stage 2, the version written March 10th, 1980, and finished at 6:44 p.m., included a complete reworking of the lyrics and essentially became the final song. Even half the midsection was in place at this time, specifically the second half, which included the stuff I stole from the earlier song, Work. The first half didn't grab me, however, but I let it go and at the time declared the song finished. Stage 3 did not happen for nearly a month, but on April 8th, 1980, I realized that, having borrowed the chorus from the song Don't Go for Everybody Had It With You, the rest of the earlier song was now fair game. I therefore, just for an experiment, took a verse from Don't Go, messed with it, and threw it into the beginning of a problematic midsection. At this time, I also rewrote a lot of the third verse, which led into the midsection. It all worked out real good, and now the song was complete. So that sounds like a lot went into this song, and it's really interesting to me, like, down to the time. He's actually got to the minute of when certain things were written, so these must be documented somewhere. So let's listen to a little bit of Look Again, and then we'll talk about it and finish up. So this is Look Again.
See my world. Oh, look at your world. See the days of my youth. Oh, look again. To the days of my youth I looked, and then I looked again. I really wish you knew. Take a look at the people around you, the ones who attempt to decide your every move, the ones who can't look in your eyes, the ones who always lie. Hey, look again, I told you, now you will know that it's true. Now you're wiser onto all the lies, now you can see and they don't fool you. Go! Look at me, I'm a boy, she said, look again, I'm a kid.
So good. Lina, any thoughts about the title track, the last song?
God, I love this.
I know.
I love this song so much.
Yes.
In fact, several years ago, I thought, I had this idea that somebody should create a drama or dramedy called "Look Again" with this as the theme. I mean, the song it writes the whole the whole plot of the show. Anyway, but this again is one of those songs that seems like perfect in its own self. It's that the lyrics are great, and to know that he Frankenstein that from a couple of other songs as well, and yet it turned out the way it did is just amazing. And again, it's another perennial favorite of all the OG Last Hands also. But yeah, that's another one of those where I listen to that. I can listen to that over and over again and just focus on that because it's such a great song.
It is. Tom, any thoughts on Look Again?
Yeah, total agreement there. Great song. It is really interesting because I have ruined a lot of songs by taking similar approach where I splice this part from this song and, well, let's try this just to break things up a little bit, and it turns into a jumble. Whereas this song just flows. It's it's engaging from the start. The lyrics are powerful, melodic. It's classic last.
Yeah, it's great. Soraya?
It's fantastic. And it just grabbed me from the get-go. And Joel Nolte doesn't let me go until the very last
No.
chord, and I'll take that.
Yeah.
You know, he's just he's really powerful, and then this band as a whole, in this song, you know, this is a really good way to walk away from the album.
Yeah.
I think it's a good statement.
And it's got great guitar licks in this. This song is another one with really, really good guitar licks. And they recorded a version for the album Danger. So it's a different version. Do you guys have any thoughts on the differences between the two? This version being recorded for Look Again and the one recorded for Danger?
Well, I'd say, you know, the Danger version of it, it's different because he was in a completely different place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was when he recorded this one, he was actually living it. Mm-hmm. So it has kind of that I don't know what feel to it. So it was more toughened up, I guess, for the Danger one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a great song regardless. You know, it still works either way.
Yes, I agree. Tom, are you familiar with that version, the Danger version?
Yeah, I haven't heard it for quite a while. Of course, the whole Danger album is a lot more muscular due to the backing, you know. So it's going to alter the song. I just remember it from that being a great song as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so that lineup, and with a more contemporary recording, it's definitely beefier, that's for sure. Yeah, it's got some muscle behind it. And I think there's some cool live version or two that I've seen online that is got a lot of power too also. So anyways, final thoughts on Look Again. Lina?
Great album. I would be very happy if it was released, possibly remastered. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we'll see. But no, this definitely, if for nothing else than just the songs that may have not been heard by anyone other than the OG Last fans, it needs to be released. Definitely.
Agreed. Tom, final thoughts?
Yeah, fantastic album. I would love to see it come out. I would like to see it, say, mixed by a skillful Last fan that is away from the band, that doesn't have to. Maybe everybody will hate it, one guy or the other guy. But maybe, you know, the end result would be more toward the fans, the immediacy of the music, which is the most important thing, and it's there no matter which way it exists. Pardon me, but I think a good remix would be definitely in order.
It sounds like you're volunteering to do. Yeah.
It's easier to do nowadays, like I was saying, with computers and things like that, or even analog. People know their way around to get things more of a powerful live sound.
Mm-hmm. So are you volunteering to do this, Tom? I nominate
Possibly.
you. In our conversation...
Anything is possible in the fullness of time.
Yes.
Oh.
In our conversation with Jack Watterson, you were highly recommended as someone who could do some great production work when you guys were sharing.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I got to listen to that. But Jack that was a blast.
Yeah, he talked.
Those sessions were rather surreal, actually. I don't know how much he told you about Hollywood Boulevard and, you know, some of the crazy things that were going on in the background while we were doing that. But, yeah, that was a great experience.
He did talk very highly about you and the relationship, too.
Yes.
Soraya, last thoughts on Look Again?
I'm in agreement with the two masters on the subject that have joined us today. I mean, This needs to come out. You know, if Tom says he was late to the last show, I was extremely late to the last, and hearing this and putting it into context, yeah, this needs to see the light of day, but definitely it needs to, I think, remixing. And I don't know if, what do you say? Tom said, yeah, anything is possible.
Yeah.
So, but no, I think with some remastering, some mixing, yes, let this come out, let us hear it again, because, it's still a valuable piece.
Yeah, that's my grandson. So that means it's time to stop. But my last thought is I just want to say that it holds its own against LA Explosion. I think it's equal, so. But anyways, my grandson says it's time to go. We've talked long enough. So thank you guys so much for joining us for this amazing album. Hopefully we do see this someday and have an opportunity to purchase this and play this on our players. Lina, thank you so much. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. You guys are the experts, and we really value your opinions. And thank you for walking through this with us.
Well, thank you for inviting us.
Yes.
Had a lot
Yeah,
of fun.
this is fun. A lot of fun. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. We'll talk again soon.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Have a good evening, you guys.
Okay.
And
You
stay
too.
healthy.
Yeah, stay healthy.
Stay well, yes.
Yeah. All right. Bye-bye, you guys.
Right.
Bye.
All right, Soraya.
Woo!
What did you think of that conversation? I am
First of
so
all,
glad.
I just love listening to Tom and Lina talk about something that they're obviously very, very passionate about. That is all things The Last.
Yes.
They're great fans, but also, great musicians in their own right. And I love hearing their observations on this album.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think their input and ideas about these songs were critical to how I view these songs, and both of them had so many good things to say and insights that I never would have thought of. Of course, Lina has all the inside scoops, and she knows the band like no other. And Tom, from a musician standpoint, brought up things that I never would have thought of. I really liked his idea about the idea of the tension between Joe and Vitas making the album, or even particular songs, adding to what they are and adding to what they became.
But if you think about it, he's right.
Yeah, he's absolutely right. Absolutely.
The great bands and the great songwriting teams, there's always been some sort of underlying tension that moves the song, the album, the performance, the band into a completely different realm. He's absolutely correct.
100%, yeah.
I think we don't like to think of it like that.
I don't.
Right? We like to think everything is harmonious. But yeah, that was a really interesting point. And then you could almost sense it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you hear the song and you go, wow, he's right.
He's absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah, there was a few things like that. And I really liked what he had to say about what a difference a drummer brings to the fold. I think drummers get a bad rap. I think I heard a joke the other day that says, what do you call a drummer without a girlfriend? Homeless.
Ba-dum-bum.
I mean, drummers get a bad rap, so I thought it was really good for him to have that insight and what value drummers bring or can bring to a band and how it could change. And we did see that with...
He said, I liked how he put it. He said, a change of a drummer signals a sea change for a band. Like it just completely, it can move it in a different direction.
Yeah,
I thought that was very, very poignant.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, Lina has everything wrapped up in her brain about all these memories. So that Elks Lodge riot, I didn't know anything about. I think I've heard about it, but never referenced as that. With some of the shows that were happening in the South Bay area, and how I think we've talked about how the punk scene got a little bit more aggressive and violent that it went along. And I think I heard something along that. But she was there. She was maybe not inside, but she was definitely an eyewitness to a lot of these things that were going on during while these songs were being written, and it was great to have her input.
You know what? Now, as I'm kind of thinking back to our conversation with Tom and Lina, what strikes me, and it's very cathartic, what strikes me is Joel Mosey is a great songwriter and has a fantastic musical ear. And the last, I agree with Joe's observations. Things happened the way they happened, and maybe that explains why the last kind of drifted away from people's attention. But this is a band that should have gone further, and because everything is there, all the elements were there, but things happen. I think that's why maybe perhaps the last is so beloved, right? Is because it's like this treasure, and that still has magic to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I, for one, really enjoyed this conversation that we had, and I hope, like the rest of us, hope that this album gets to see the light of day officially someday. And I hope that our listeners enjoyed us walking through some of these songs and enjoyed what we had to say. I certainly did.
And it's worth. It's an album, and now Jeff, not released, but as Lina and Tom both mentioned, copies circulated.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone wanted to listen to it in its entirety, where do they go?
So there is, it is available on YouTube, so you can listen to it that way. I think it's one entire video for the whole album. So if you want to listen to it, how it was released in test pressing form, you can go to YouTube, look up The Last Look Again, and you can find it that way. But let's hope there's a cleaned up version coming our way that will be available. And as soon as it is, we'll be certain to let everybody know. Yeah. Yeah.
For sure. But, yeah. For now, gente, a groovear.
Groove on, Paisley people. I love those. I love those two.